So, nagbabalik tayo sa ating violin tips and tricks. And for today's video, I want to talk about exaggeration, no? And how we can apply that term in our practices para mas mapadali natin to make our practices more efficient and easier for us to follow and digest. Okay, so when we say exaggeration, no, parang we exaggerate the movements that we do, no? Especially if it's new for us, no? For example, kapag nagturo ako sa student ko ng beginner on bowing, on how they move their fingers, for example, di ba? Gusto natin talagang sinasagad nila yung pagka-down ng fingers. And then up. Why is that? So, para masanay. Because we don't know the movements pa when we're starting out, diba? It's something new, something very, very hard to understand for newcomers. Bakit ba kailangan natin gawin yung mga bagay na yan? And then, slowly, it becomes a habit, no? And that's how you develop habits. By first looking at the things that you're doing, being aware that you are doing these things, until such time, it comes to a point na hindi mo na siya pinapansin, hindi mo na siya iniintindi, di ba? So, it needs to be exaggerated at first para malaman ng katawan natin that we are really doing something that we need to focus on, no? Because, of course, if we don't try to exaggerate the movements, parang medyo nahihiya tayo to do it, no? For example, if bago ka tapos pinapagawa ko yung down bow na ganun, ang gagawin mo ganito lang. What ends up happening is that you're not really reacting too much to it. Meaning, less yung pag-intindi mo sa kanya. The less you understand what's happening with your body. And that's really, really important when you're learning something new. Diba? So, first time, for everything, you have to really exaggerate all the movements so that it follows into your head, no? Parang, when we talk about mind-muscle connection for those people who lift weights, no? For example, yung mga nag-gym, di ba? Laging sinasabi yan ng mga trainers, ng mga coaches, there should also be a mind and muscle connection when you're playing your instrument. Again, I always like to say that musicians are almost the same as athletes, that we need to train our muscles as well, but we are training a smaller group of muscles, mas fine yung movements, but it's still the same. How do you train big muscles? The principle applies in training small muscles. Another example we can use is when changing strings. Okay, so when you're already past that beginning stage, diba? Parang ang dali-dali mo nang mailipat yung bow. You can really change strings at will. But when you're a beginner, it's really one of the hardest things to do. Diba? Kasi you really don't know the angles that your elbow should come up or down to. Diba? So what do? You have to exaggerate first that your G-string position, for example, is like this, and that your D-string is like this. Sure ka na hindi tatama kasi ang laki nung difference, right? But of course, when you start playing, you don't need that much. But if you're only starting out, you have to first set that boundary by exaggerating the distance you need. So for me, G string and D string. Tumatama pa rin, no? G, D, then my A string is almost close to my body for starters, diba? Kasi sure ako na hindi na siya tatama sa D string. And then my E string is almost as close to my body. That's how you start. And then, kapag sanay ka na, diba? When you're leaning into one string, no, kung kailangan marami kang note on the G string, you can't really go down too much kasi mapapagod ka. But when you're starting out, you have to test your limits, kumbaga. You always have to go the extra mile for the first, let's say, few years of your training, di ba? And it doesn't hurt to try out and maximize your movements. Kasi hindi ka tayo sanay, no? When it comes to bowing, di ba? We've talked about that in a previous video about our up bows na laging kapos, di ba? We always undershoot our up bows. So we have to exaggerate that movement to get the most out of it, to get enough of it, diba? Kasi if we don't try and just, simple lang natin gawin, sa una pa lang, hindi na siya magre-register at something new. Because everything that you're doing if you're starting out is new, and your body and mind doesn't really know how to discern what's right from wrong. So you have to exaggerate the right movements to get rid of the wrong movements that you're trying to do as well, diba? Ganun siya. So, let's go to the bowing, diba? Sometimes, yung iba, they think this is a full bow. Why? Because they're afraid to fail, diba? And if you exaggerate, kahit lumagpas ka, okay lang. As long as you reach that end of the bow. Because you have to know your limits nga, diba? You have to exaggerate your movements, make them as big as possible so that you know how big you can get and how big you need to get to bago ka bumalik dun sa maliliit before you come back to the smaller things, diba? Because if you try to reach your limit, if you know exactly when to stop. But if you don't try to reach your limit, you're limited by yourself. Diba? In bowing nga, if you find this is your limit, hanggang doon ka na lang every time. You won't really reach the end. Sayang na yung rosin, sayang yung buhok ng bow mo if you don't try to reach the ends. Diba? So you have to exaggerate those movements, make those movements really, really big. Whether that's bowing, whether that's changing strings, whether that's using your hands. Diba? Those movements may look silly at first, but in order for you to really get the hang of it, para magawa mo ito, you have to do this first. Kasi hindi nga alam nung katawan mo how to respond, how to react. So you have to teach it first how to exaggerate really everything, and then as you get more comfortable with it, the less na iniisip mo na siya, your body follows suit, It's the same term as muscle memory, Ginagamit din natin yung term na yan. So, once your mind is already conditioned that the body can do it on its own, hindi na niya yan masyadong iisipin. The more things you can really work on, for example, your interpretation of a piece, instead of working on your technique, dahil solid na yung foundation ng technique mo because you started exaggerating and then you came to a point that you don't need to exaggerate anymore, you can focus on other things, di ba? Mas makaka-focus ka sa intonation, you can focus on the quality of the sound or the tone color. You can also focus on your dynamics kasi alam na niya kung paano siya gagalaw. But it takes a lot of time if you don't work on it, di ba? That's why, I don't know, if you see a lot of other musicians, siguro minsan pag naglalakad ka, gumaganyan-ganyan ka na rin. Or your fingers, you move your fingers, It's still practice, diba? Sabi natin, we can practice without the instrument. And once we get to the instrument, we can exaggerate the movement so that we get loose, diba? Kasi the first thing when a beginner holds its instrument, parang you're always too stiff, diba? Sometimes people will hold it like this, nakaganyan, So kailangan mo munang maalis yon, and you have to loosen up, diba? To get the most out of your instrument, whether that's a cheap instrument or an expensive instrument. If you don't focus on what your body does, how you exaggerate your movements, how you actually do certain strokes, certain patterns of your body's movements, mahirapan kang mag-adjust. You really won't be able to do a lot of things that you want to do if you played it safe, kumbaga, You have to get out of your comfort zone, really exaggerate. Even vibratos, di ba? So, not most of the time naman, di ka gagamit ng malalaking vibrato. But when you're starting out, you have to practice the slowest and the widest, di ba? Kasi pag hindi mo kayang gawin yun, hindi mo magagawa to. Diba? It all starts with slow practice and exaggerating those concepts, principles, and movements so that your body can react properly to the certain situation you're in, di ba? Kasi pag alam na niya yun, habang tumatagal, nagiging parang paghinga na lang, di ba? We want it to be as natural as breathing. The problem is, we don't hold our instruments every time, di ba? Madalang natin siyang mahawakan. Maybe, if you're not a professional, you hold it once or twice a day na 1 hour lang, ganun lang kahaba, di ba? It takes a lot of time to get used to it. And if you just exaggerate your movements, it could drastically help on how you learn and how fast your pace is on learning. Yeah. So, if nakatulong tong video na to, please do drop a like, comment down on this video, share this video with your friends, and of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel. My course on Udemy is still available. Check it out. And check out my music on Spotify, on all major music platforms. This has been Ryan Monakil for Violin Tips and Tricks, and I'll see you on the next video.